Greetings, princesses and princes of the Place API. We are going to integrate Google Place Autocomplete into our Snacktacular app in preparation of working with MapKit in the next video. Now, most of this video is a challenge, since if you've been following along with our course, you've already worked with Google Place Autocomplete in the WeatherGift app, and it's very easy to set up. However, if you've arrived anew or you'd like a refresher, we always go through a step-by-step solution after the challenge slide. Let's code! So here's our challenge. You'll do everything necessary so that Google Place Autocomplete works when pressing the Lookup Place bar button on the Spot Detail View controller. Consider, you've already installed CocoaPod, so you don't need to do that. You need an API key for this project. You'll set it up the same way you set up your API for WeatherGift. Now you also want to create an API keys.swift file and use .gitignore to prevent this from being shared on GitHub. Again, that was shown in the earlier video as well. Now you know that Google gives you back an object called place. One of its properties is coordinate. For now, just print that coordinate to the console so that it shows the latitude and longitude. Also update the name text field and the address text field with the place.name and place.formatted address that you get back from Google. Now in the video after this challenge, we'll add coordinates as a Spot class property. We'll create computed properties for latitude and longitude, and we'll update the Spot Swift class so that latitude and longitude are saved and loaded. Why don't you give this a shot? Pause. And let's show you a solution. So as mentioned, at the time that I'm recording this video, Firebase documentation isn't very good, but the Google Place Autocomplete documentation is actually quite good. So let's go and find that. We'll do a quick search for Swift Google Place Autocomplete. You should see a link that brings up Google Place Autocomplete for iOS developers. Now there's always a chance that this has been reorganized since I recorded this video, but hopefully it looks pretty much like what you're seeing here. Once you're on this page, let's start with Get an API Key. Now let's scroll down and click this link that says Visit the Google Cloud Platform console. Now my assumption here is you've already worked through the previous videos and you've signed up for a Google Cloud Platform account. If you haven't, make sure that you do that now. Now you'll have to set up a billing account with a valid credit card. You won't be charged unless your account gets quite a bit of usage. And neither I nor any of my students have exceeded the initial amount meant to encourage learning and experimentation. But if you don't set up a billing account and link it to any API that you set up, then your API simply won't work. So be sure you've set up a Google Cloud Platform account, maybe link your Gmail account to this, and set up a billing account with a valid credit card. And if you've gone through the WeatherGift app, you've already done this. If you have to do this, hopefully Google's online instructions are clear. I also went through this step by step in an earlier WeatherGift video, which you can find in the WeatherGift playlist. Now, if you already have a Google Places API, you could actually reuse that API key. So if you followed along, you could conceivably reuse the API key that you've been using for WeatherGift. Now, if you restricted the API like we did earlier, you'd also need to add the bundle identifier of your Snacktacular project to that API key as well. But it's better practice to just go ahead and create another project and get another API key. There's going to be no extra charge for this, and it'll make it easier to track usage according to app. The only downside is if you create lots of projects in Google Cloud, sometimes Google will complain and say that you've reached a project quota. You can either delete any old projects that were experiments, or Google will show you a link where you can actually request an increase in your project creation quota. If you've been following along with our tutorial, this is probably only your second Google Cloud project, so you're nowhere near your quota. So I'm going to go up to this pull-down menu here. This is where you can access a current project. Mine says VoiceKit because for another class I was experimenting with Google Voice Assistant. I'm sure yours doesn't say that. But click to pull down this menu, and you should see a Select a Project dialog, and click on New Project in the upper right-hand corner. By the way, I recently requested an increase in my project quota, so I'm getting a message about that right here. For your project name, you can put in anything. Snacktacular should be fine. Since I've created this assignment, I've got plenty of Snacktacular named projects. I'll call this one Snacktacular New. You don't need to add an organization. You can click Create. You'll get a notification that your project is being created, but hopefully in just a few seconds you'll see a green check mark showing that your project has indeed been created. Once you see the message stating that your project has been created, once you click on it, you'll see the name listed just to the right of the Google Cloud Platform. You can click on this API box. It will bring you to the API and Services screen. Then click on the plus sign that says Enable APIs and Services. Now the API that we want to enable is the Places API. It's usually shown right near the top since it's such a popular one. So if you see that, you can click on it. Otherwise, you can just search for it in the search box. That'll bring up the Google Places screen here, and you can click on the Enable button. Now, even though you clicked Enable, you've still got a few extra steps to go through. Click on Credentials on the left-hand side. The link up top says to view all credentials or to create new credentials, visit the Credentials API and Services. That's what we want to do. Now, you see there's probably no API keys created for this project since we just created it, but if you go up here, there's a plus sign that says Create Credentials, so click on that and select API key. Here's your project API key. You can copy that by clicking on this copy icon on the right-hand side. Now we will want to restrict the key, but before we do that, let's go ahead and set up a file to hold the API key just like we did with WeatherGift. So over in our Xcode project, I'm going to create an API keys.swift file. I'm going to do that right underneath the extension that I created, this UI view controller plus alert extension. So I'm going to right click on that file. I'll select new file, Swift file, next, and then create. And then just like in WeatherGift, I'll call this struct API keys, that's upper camel case, open and close curlies, and we'll set up a static constant inside to hold the API key. So we'll say static let, and then in lower camel case, Google Places key equals double quote and Command V to paste in the API string I just copied. Then return to your browser and click the restrict key button. On the next screen, you'll be asked if you want to provide a new name for your API key. Any name would be fine. I'll just call mine Snacktacular New, since this is the only key that I plan on using for this project, which is also called Snacktacular New. And when I pressed return, I got back on this screen. This isn't really where I expected to be, but if you click back on the name of the key that you just created, you'll get back to the key restrictions page. Now I'm going to click this button here that restricts things to iOS apps, and then I'll click on add a new item to add my bundle identifier. Then let's head back to Xcode. Remember where we find the bundle identifier, you just want to click on your Snacktacular project icon at the top of your project navigator on the left-hand side. And by default, you should be in the targets and then the general tab setting. And if you are, you should see the bundle identifier up top. It's probably your last name, name of the app. Just highlight that whole string, copy it with a Command C, head back to the browser, paste it in this bundle ID field, and click done. Now you could reuse this API key among a bunch of different kinds of Google services here. I'm going to click on restrict the API key, and then I'm given a bunch of choices that I could check which APIs I want to restrict this key to work with. By clicking Places API, this API key can only be used to access the Google Places API. And again, only for a Mac app with my bundle identifier. So that's a pretty good amount of security to make sure even if somebody finds your API key, they're not going to be able to abuse it and rack up usage to your account. Now, after you made your choice, just click someplace outside the scrolling selection, and then I'll click on the Save button. And with that done, our API key should be set up. The next step is to head back into Xcode and make sure that we restrict our file using gitignore so that API keys.swift is not uploaded to GitHub. Again, another security measure to try to limit the ability of anybody to find your API key. Now we're going to do this within the terminal program, so I'm going to press Command Space to bring up Spotlight, type terminal, press return. The terminal launches. I'll make the screen a little bit bigger. That's by pressing Shift Command Plus a few times. And I'm going to CD space and change directory to Snacktacular. Over in the Finder, I'm going to drag this blue folder icon at the top of my window. Once I'm inside of Snacktacular, let it go inside of the terminal program, press return. That should change the directory to the directory that contains the first layer of my Snacktacular files. If you do an ls to list out those files, you should see that you've got your pod file in there. You see the same files that we're showing in the Finder, including your snacktacular.exe workspace. Then we're going to create a gitignore file using the nano program. So we type in nano and then .gitignore. That launches the nano program inside of terminal, and the .gitignore means this file will be called .gitignore. The dot in front means that it's going to be a hidden file in the Macintosh file system. Now what you'd put in this file are the name of any files that you don't want to upload to GitHub, as long as they're at the same directory level as this .gitignore file, or they're inside of any folders that are at this level or lower. This gitignore file will exclude them from the upload. You have to make sure that the name of the file is spelled exactly as it is in your directory. Now to make super sure that you've got the spelling of the file name right, you can just return to Xcode, click on the file in the project navigator, press return. That gets you into rename mode, but you can use that to Command A to select the entire file name, copy with a Command C, then head back to terminal, Command V. You're guaranteed that you've just spelled the file name correctly. Then down here at the bottom, you see the different commands to use. Control X will exit you out of Nano. You'll get a prompt that asks if you want to save this. Type Y to indicate yes. The next prompt file name to write already has .gitignore there because you got in here by saying nano space .gitignore, so press return. And the gitignore file is created. But if I do an ls here and press return, I actually won't see gitignore listed in the output with the other files that are in this directory. If you head back to the Finder and you take a look at a window that shows the contents of your Snacktacular folder, if you type Shift Command period, that's a shortcut key that will show you hidden files. The hidden files are sort of grayed out a little bit to convey that they are hidden. Now here I can see I actually do have my gitignore file in here. Perfect. I also have a hidden folder called .git. We won't worry about that. And this works as a toggle, so you could shift command period to hide the hidden files again. And that's it. This file should now be prevented from being uploaded to GitHub. And now we're ready to add the code we need in order to get Google Place Autocomplete working in our app. Head back to your browser, and in the Google Map Platform documentation where we're in the page Get an API Key, scroll down a bit until you see this area that says Add the API Key to your appdelegate.swift as follows. Now we're going to need to import Google Places, so I'm just going to click on this copy icon. Then we'll return to our project and click on appdelegate.swift. We can paste that in right under our other import statements. Then head back to the documentation and copy this line too. This one here that begins with the GMS Places client. So copy that. Return to appdelegate.swift, and you want to paste it inside of the body of this first application function, the one that has did finish launching with options inside of it. Any place inside this function before return true should be fine. I'll paste it just below firebase app.config. Now this line is asking you to put in your provider API key. Now we want to actually delete this entire string, including the double quotes, because remember we created our own struct with a static let constant. So we'll replace this with API keys.googleplaces key. That'll put in our string for us. We've just done all the configuration we need in our appdelegate.swift file. Now back in our browser, in our Google Maps platform documentation, click on Place Autocomplete on the left-hand side, and we'll scroll down here to find more chunks of code we need to copy over to get Google Place Autocomplete implemented in our app. Now we see down here we need to grab another import Google Places, so highlight and copy this, and all the code that we need to enter now is going to be inside of our spot detail viewcontroller.swift. That's where the functionality for the lookup place button is going to be. So click on that file. Under Import UI Kit, you can paste in Import Google Places. Next up, we need to code up an IB action for our Lookup Place button, but we haven't created the IB action stub for that. So why don't we Option click on top of Main Storyboard, Control drag over from the Lookup Place bar button item, make sure that the type is set to UR bar button item, and we'll name this action Lookup Button Pressed. Click Connect. Then you can click on the X for our main storyboard to get back to our standard editor. Now, head back to our documentation. Google actually gives us much more code than we need in here. So find this function that starts with obj.c func autocomplete clicked, and we want the first two lines in here, the let autocomplete controller and the autocomplete controller.delegate. Highlight those two lines. The first one calls a special Google class to create an autocomplete controller. That's the controller we're about to display. The second one sets up the view controller as its delegate. Copy them with a Command C. Return to spot detail view controller and paste them inside of location button pressed. And return back to the browser, and we want the last line in this function. This is just a standard present method. We've used this to display alert controllers before. This is going to display Google's special autocomplete controller. You can copy the comment line if you'd like, return to location button pressed, paste it in there, and our IB action is done. Next, we can grab this entire extension. So right from just before the word extension up into the last curly, highlight it, Command C, head back to our code, and right after the last curly in this class, Command V to paste it in. Now you need to change the name of the class this is extending. It's not view controller, it's spot detail view controller. I'm just going to scroll up to the top of the class, copy the class name, then go back here into extension, and paste it over view controller. Then down here, you recall when we get to this first function, that means that the user has successfully selected a place from Google's view controller. See Google's comment up here, it says handles the user selection. Now the user selection comes into this function as a place named place, which is of type GMS place. And if you're curious about this beyond what you can get through code completion, Google has their entire documentation reference online. Here is information on GMS place. You can see all of the different properties, including name, place ID, coordinate, phone number, formatted address. So I'm going to go down here just before we dismiss, and I'm going to say spot.name equals place.name. Now look at this name property in code completion. It is an optional. See that? We got the question mark after the string. If the user selected a name when they made their selection, I'm not sure how we could possibly get nil in here, but Google created this data structure as an optional, so we need to somehow acknowledge the possibility of a nil or our code won't work. Now we could force unwrap this with an exclamation point, but that would be less safe. I didn't write Google's part of the code, so I'm not 100% certain that I will never receive a nil here. So instead, we'll use nil coalescing with two question marks. If place.name is non-nil, then we get the proper unwrapped string, but after the two question marks, if we do get a nil in place.name, I'll just send back the string unknown place. Similarly, on the next line, it's going to be almost the same thing. So I'm just going to highlight the line I wrote, copy it, paste it down below, but I'm going to change this to spot.address equals place. And its formatted address. And what I'll put in after my two question marks is going to be unknown address. Now, I also want to make sure that I'm getting the longitude and latitude. So I'm just going to quickly print the coordinates out to the console. I'll say print and I'll say in the string coordinates equals string interp place.coordinates. We're not saving coordinates to spot. We'll do that in the next video. And now that I've updated these two spot values, I'm going to call update user interface. Remember, that's the function that we wrote up above that takes values from spot and puts them in the appropriate user interface elements in this view controller. Now, we previously called this from view.did when we first got into this view controller, but since we just changed spot name and spot address, we need to make sure that we've updated our user interface to show that. Let's build and run and see how this works. No errors. Hammer time. Here's our app. Already logged in. I'm going to click plus, look up a place. Tonight I want sushi, so I'm going to type in Sushi Man. And look at the majesty of your app. The name text field is updated. My address text field is updated with the correct address. And down here in my console, I can see I'm printing out the coordinates, latitude and longitude. Excellent. Save that bad boy. Save into the cloud. Everything's looking good. Click on Sushi Man. Cancel and go back. So, Wifter, you have completely mastered autocomplete. We will leverage this in the next video when we learn about MapKit and plot these place locations on a map. Feel good about your skills and keep at it.